keynote titled Outlooks and Foresight, the Energy Transition by Dr. Angela Wilkinson, Secretary General and Chief Executive Officer of World Energy Council, is going to start now.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, strangers I have yet to meet and get to know, good morning. I am delighted and honoured to be here as the 6th Secretary General to talk about energy outlooks. And I'm going to talk about energy in terms of what I think is most important about energy, which is not technology or money, but realistic hope of a better future for humanity. We have to remember, all of us, that every living system evolves through a fundamental transformation of its underlying energy system. And that is as true now today, here at this meeting and in the advent of COP28, as it has been since time immemorial. What I would like to do is talk a little bit about what I see as the outlook in energy and what we are trying to do to change the outlook. A good place to start when you're thinking about the future is not to get stuck in where we are, but to adopt a bigger picture perspective. This is one way of looking at the last 100 years in energy. And when we stand here in the present, it's important to understand that only 7% of the current world energy system is comprised of wind and solar energy forms. Only 2% of personal cars are electric vehicles, that the pace of decarbonisation is much slower than we need it to be, and that 3 billion plus people in the world lack sufficient access to affordable energy for better lives and livelihoods. So when we look at the energy situation, we understand we are in a new era of energy transition for people and planet, and that the challenge of decarbonisation is in parallel with the global trends around digitalisation, decentralisation, increasing diversity in energy systems, and disruption as usual. We've all seen more disruption in energy in the last few years. And the risk of disorderly energy transitions has not gone away. We have seen compounding crisis impacting unevenly across modern energy societies, with the impact of the COVID crisis, with the impact of the return of energy insecurity, with the build-up of climate change momentum. Who knows what's coming? So when we think about the future of energy, we must work for the best, but always keep an eye open and our minds open to what might be different to what we hope for and what we expect. The search for solutions today, it's worth taking stock of what people think will happen. So our most recent Pulse survey indicates that the majority of people that we surveyed think that the COP28 meeting that will take place this week is the last chance for a course correction globally. 50% think that there's an urgent need for better collaboration. Collaboration is a very big word in energy today. Only 11% think that their societies have reached the critical mass needed to enable and sustain an acceleration of decarbonisation. And 24% are worried that a passive and quiet majority is holding back change. So when we think about the search for new solutions, it's important to remember that what has worked in the past isn't enough. And what we're focusing on is how do we redesign the whole energy system with others, and we call that the humanising energy challenge. So energy is a system, and there's increasing diversity in energy systems worldwide. We all talk about there's no one-size-fits-all solution. There's no such thing as an easy, quick fix. And we have to remember that energy systems include people. Indeed, the biggest blind spot in all the roadmaps that are available is the role of people and the shifting role of demand and energy uses and how those will evolve. We're faced with we are halfway at this moment between the Kyoto Protocol of 1997 and the goal of achieving net zero by 2050. Indeed, fewer terms have become more common in the last 5 years than energy transition, decarbonization, and net zero by 2050. But what is underlying this change in energy is not a simple swap of old technologies for new. It is a much deeper societal transformation as well as a change in the technology underpinnings. The problem is most talked about in terms of the speed of swapping out old technologies for new, the shift to new power systems. But we also need to talk more and use foresight and futures thinking to help us think about the underlying shift in social power structures and the societal transformation that's possible. To go faster, we need the flow of more technology and money. But to go fairer, we have to engage and empower people and diverse place-based communities and help them see that they're not passive characters in this story, but they are the co-creators. To move further, net zero is a milestone, but it's not the destination. We have to think about how do we look at new models of economic progress. We have to think beyond the energy system itself, at the interfaces of energy with other systems. And we're trying to do this in an increasingly divisive and polarized era. In many parts, in many countries, we're getting stuck. Even as we're looking at the future, we're getting frozen by the fear of the future. Climate anxiety has become a real issue. We're getting stuck by the fear of missing out. Will our country have a fair share in the benefits of the new energy system? And we're getting stuck by the fear of others. We have to find a way of bridging climate catastrophizing and what I call technological hyperbolism. These are the extremes that define the debate. But what we really need is a new middle movement. And that middle movement has to be able to look at what is desirable and realistic. Big leadership questions face us as we look to the future of energy, and nobody's asking the same question in the same way. In fact, the how to make faster, fairer, and more far-reaching energy transitions happen depends on the who with. Which question have you been addressing? Is it one of these? Maybe it's another question. But that is the challenge that faces us all. How to humanize energy to move faster, fairer, and more further forward together. So that's the setting that I would like to use to talk about what we at the World Energy Council are doing and how we use the future in this conversation about mobilizing energy transitions at speed and scale. So the first thing that we are doing is we believe we have to have the future at the table as well as on the menu. So we are activating what we call an intergenerational community. For 40 years, we've invested in future energy leaders, and we are now moving our investment in future energy leaders who are networks that exist across over 70 countries worldwide into how they can become a vanguard for action. We also, for the last 10 years, have been running the Startup Energy Transition Awards to try to get energy entrepreneurs to get the global recognition and attention that they need, and to extend the concept of energy entrepreneurship into more developing and emerging countries so that we can bring them back to the global table. Another thing that we're doing is we're trying to change the way the story of energy transition is being told, to tell it through a human-centric lens.
We do tend to take the energy in the homes for granted because it is a simple flip of a switch. We've got used to a very high standard of living and it's using most energy.
All 80% of the global energy system is still fossil fuel. We need to change that.
When you look at our world today, we're seeing more and more devastating environmental impact from climate change.
We don't really understand which fuel we consume.
My grandchildren, their grandchildren deserve to enjoy the planet the same way we enjoy it.
I think it's time for us to pause.
I believe that we can replace fossil fuels to decarbonise our world.
The world needs multiple pathways to net zero carbon emissions.
There are a lot of technologies to explore: floating solar, offshore wind.
Hydrogen, when produced through renewable sources, can bring in the right energy.
There are so many people behind this effort. It's innovation at its finest, and it's exciting.
Really driven to do absolutely everything we can to make the change that we believe the world needs to see.
We can control the future instead of letting the future control us.
So in partnership with BBC Storyworks for the last 4 years, we've been showing stories of how diverse communities across the world are responding to the challenges and demands of energy transitions and helping people share what they see as the benefits of more affordable and clean energy uses so that more people are inspired to get involved in the journey. For me, it's not enough to hope for a better future. Realistic hope is always in action. And the challenge we have is how do we mobilize agency now, everywhere, in this challenge? Another thing that we're doing is we take the role of empowering women and children very seriously. I have to say, I am not a person who likes to talk about the role of women in energy in terms of just quotas in boardrooms. What we're interested in is how do we enable women in their role as owners, designers, entrepreneurs, users, buyers of energy, not a one-dimensional view of women in energy, but a 360-degree possibility space of the role of women in energy. And let's not forget, not the next future energy leaders generation, but kids in energy. I was challenged recently by somebody who said, surely we shouldn't be engaging children in energy transition conversations. That's our responsibility. But if we don't show the future generation what energy will be in the future, how do they become inspired to think about a career or a life in energy? So I'm going to show you a short excerpt from our Kids in Energy program in Chile, where they have little kits that go out into many of the rural villages and encourage children to build little solar photovoltaic cells and little wind turbines. And they start to see and get to understand this energy system for themselves.
Aprendí mucho sobre la ciencia, sobre la energía, sobre muchas cosas.
Como armar los circuitos, lo que son las resistencias, para qué sirven.
Logramos usar el hidrógeno como fuente de energía renovable. Aprender a enchufar cosas, conectar las luces. Esta cosa conecte hace la electricidad para que prenda.
So it's not enough to talk about diversity. Activating diversity is a different concept. And again, futures, design, foresight, and ways of engaging the future in the present are ways where we can create a space to activate diversity in a different way. I don't know who did the counting, but when I went to the Clean Energy Ministerial last year in Pittsburgh, it was reported that there are over 9,000 different assessments on climate and energy transitions. We certainly don't need another report. What we need to do is make sure, though, that we continue to forge new common sense from the increasing diversity of perspectives that are emerging as energy transition progresses. Multiple energy transition pathways are emerging in all regions. Our challenge is finding ways to lead with and learn from each other, to forge common understanding, recognizing we need flexibility along the way. This isn't just about replacing power generation, it requires new infrastructures, new storage solutions, and we must anticipate much more, shifting demand and new uses and users of energy. So, insights and reports are important. We produce a lot of them as well, but we produce them on the basis of listening across the diversity of energy transition pathways and leadership perspectives that are emerging from across the world. Another area that we play a role in is to recognise that energy is not and has never been a single issue agenda. And as we progress energy transitions, we must navigate an ocean of energy futures and foresight thinking. There are now thousands of reports, but also dozens of sets of global energy scenarios. We try to compare and contrast energy projections, energy outlooks, energy scenarios, and try and understand what the differences and assumptions are. That's what you can see in the comparison report here. And for the last 10 years, we have had an evolving story of world energy scenarios, which has recognized how the transition and the need to balance security alongside climate change has been evolving. What we've seen in the last couple of years is we've seen these compounding crises and energy swinging from one crisis to another. 20 years ago, we introduced something called the World Energy Trilemma Framework. I don't know how many of you have heard of something called the Energy Trilemma. Quick show of hands. Anybody heard of the Energy Trilemma? The need to balance energy security, affordability and equity, and environmental sustainability as we progress energy transitions, right? And we compare and contrast how are governments, how are countries performing in terms of managing that, and we use this to provide benchmarking and also to engage in integrated policy pathfinding. We're in the process of updating this framework because there are new dimensions for security. There's conversation about climate risk and resilience. There are new conversations about access and affordability, and in particular, access of whom to what? Who is this energy transition for? And also evolution around the sustainability angle. We're not just concerned about planetary overshoot in terms of 1.5 degrees centigrade. We've also got to be attentive to the amount of materials and energy that's required to produce more renewable energy infrastructure. So we have to be attentive of other planetary boundaries as well. It's not enough to have the future as a report. As we're moving through this energy transition, one of the things we also know is that change has to include collaboration across sectors, silos, and segments of society. The language that's been coined around this is something called the new energy innovation ecosystem. I'm fascinated by the concept of an ecosystem being full of people rather than lots of different species. But it's really important that we learn to simulate the future through ecosystem conversations. So two recent examples of how we've been looking at the future through ecosystem interactions. One around what does the policy enabling context look like if you're looking at circular carbon economy and its relationship to energy transition. So again, an interaction of many different stakeholders to look at what the enabling environment needs to look like to accelerate that. The second one is the green grids game. There is no energy transition without transmission. And transmission requires not just a lot of copper and wires, but also social licensing and permitting in many countries, so that the many communities along the way can feel that they are part of that. The last thing that we do as the World Energy Council is we convene and connect diverse leaders across silos, segments and sectors of society during World Energy Congress. As we move from the climate-centric COP here in the next 10 days to the energy-centric World Energy Congress, we will be convening in the pioneering port of Rotterdam, and we will be discussing how to redesign energy systems for people and planet, showcase how communities and countries are making progress, and involve women, future energy leaders, and place-based and vulnerable communities in that conversation. So I hope that when you finish here, you will come to Congress with the energy future you want to see.
The transition towards clean and inclusive energy. Do you want to be part of the future of energy? The 26th World Energy Congress is the most influential global energy event of our time. This long-standing energy gathering connects a dynamic community of international leaders to take action. Join us in Rotterdam in 2024.
4 years ago, I had the honor of stepping up to be the 6th Secretary General and the first woman in 100 years to lead the World Energy Council. We brought in a different agenda. It's humanizing energy. Humanizing energy to make faster, fairer, and more far-reaching energy transitions happen. As the first speaker announced, you can't do that by forecasting the future. You have to do it by co-creating. There's a lot of rhetoric today on collaboration. Collaboration is the key to a better future for all, but we're going to have to dig deep. The collaboration we need for the future is not the collaboration that worked in the past. It's going to be more horizontal. It's going to involve people who aren't like us. That's the future of energy. Thank you very much for having me here.